Hello, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to this Resilience Ready Masterclass. My name is Matti Gontsas. I'm a coaching director and senior performance coach at Hintsa Performance, and I'm joined here today by Avril Rodriguez and Neil Buchanan. And we could start with brief introductions. So I'll hand it over to Avril just to briefly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matti. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And my name is Avril Rodriguez. I am a performance coach at Hintsa Performance. I'm also a psychologist with a background in psychology, holistic well-being as well. I am a yoga therapist and meditation instructor. And I also have a background in neurolinguistic programming as well. So happy to be here and to meet everyone.
Thanks, Avril. And Neil.
Thanks, Matti. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this masterclass today. I'm a senior performance coach at Hintsa, and I've been with Hintsa since 2018. I'm also a psychologist, a bit like Avril, and work at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the program director for a master's course there in performance psychology. My background is in sport, and with Hintsa, I primarily work with executives doing executive coaching. In my spare time, I like walking, taking a lot of exercise, and socializing with friends.
All right, thank you very much. I'll get rid of the slide, and we'll be able to see each other, and you'll be seeing our pictures hopefully a bit more clearly as well. So this is meant to be a chat, an opportunity for us to share our thoughts on resilience, and at the same time also provide you an opportunity to ask questions. So there's a Q&A feature that's available in Zoom, and we'd like you to utilize that. We don't promise to answer every question, but as we're going through our presentation, our discussion, we'd like to incorporate also things that you would like to hear or learn about. So please do utilize the Q&A feature. But as a way of kind of introducing the topic of resilience, we'll do a little round of sharing some thoughts regarding the types of things that we're hearing and we're seeing in terms of our corporate clients that we work with. Some of the key things that are challenging resilience. So maybe, Avril, if you'd like to start, just sharing some of the things that you're seeing in your clientele in today's world that are really challenging resilience.
Wow, thank you for that, Matti. And, in terms of resilience, it seems to be popping up in many different ways as compared to the single, or at least seemingly singular, straightforward way that it used to be perceived, right? So resilience before seemed to be like bouncing back from a particularly intense period of time, right? Going back to the way things used to be. And now from what I'm seeing with my clients, some of them are looking at either bouncing back to where they used to be or bouncing back to, in a sense, just being more well with where they are currently. Some of them are even taking the opportunity to bounce back, into like a leveled up sense of self. And what are these intense periods? These could be things like having to move country, either for a personal reason or perhaps for a new job posting. It could be one of the major reasons or major causes of life stress, right? Which could be marriage, change of career, change of living space, whether it is simply the home itself or moving to this other country, right? It could be a death in the family, hopefully not. It could be the birth of a child. The really interesting thing that I'm seeing here is that these intense periods, intense can be difficult and intense can be joyful and exuberant and exciting. And all these things are coming in different ways, being experienced in different ways. And my clients are just looking to, how do I find a sense of balance, coming back to that homeostasis or that well-being line that I used to have before. Yeah, many different ways.
Yeah, thanks. So those are definitely common issues that we're seeing in our clientele. Anything, Neil, from your side, any kind of key things that you're seeing as challenges?
Yes, similar to Avril, their resilience is required as a result of lots of stimuli coming towards the individual. And in people's careers, change underpins lots of stimuli coming towards them. So a change in your role, moving organization, dealing with setbacks, dealing with the unexpected. So yeah, lots of stressors can come towards individuals, and it's really managing those stressors and being able to control them that is a sort of hallmark of the resilient individual. Some examples from my clients, for example, going from a management role to becoming a partner within an organization, and a huge amount of responsibility changes, which are unfamiliar. This creates a new load for the individual that they need to manage, and this unfamiliarity really stresses their ability to be resilient. So yeah, as with what Avril was saying, these changes are key to resilience.
One of the things that we've been noticing is kind of in relation to what was just shared as well is that sometimes it's big events, sometimes it's a relocation, sometimes it's a promotion, and sometimes it's a compounding effect of multiple things, little things here and there that start to build up and perhaps put us a bit on the edge, and then any extra little thing in a sense can that just perhaps tip it over. Something that may also be a challenge. I've had clients with illness issues. Sometimes it's a personal illness, or sometimes it's an illness in the family, and that the load that it suddenly puts on you to be able to deal with those issues. Maybe it's a family member that's going through a difficult period of time, and that definitely is challenging. Some of the, like was mentioned already with the promotions, I've had several clients say, hey, I had good routines, I was doing well, but then I got this new job, which is fantastic, and I wanted it, but I kind of put off all these maybe things that I was doing that was really helping me to keep balance, because I wanted to step into this new role, and 6 months, 8 months in, and you're realizing, hey, this is hard. I am struggling. How do I manage this? Another aspect that we were discussing kind of as we were preparing for the session was just the general uncertainty of the world. I remember, Neil, you had some thoughts around that in terms of just the kind of age and the times that we're living in. Would you want to elaborate maybe a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so we're all subject to the macro changes, macro political changes, macroeconomic changes. And while they might seem far away, they actually influence our economic structures, and the organizations we're in, therefore, are influenced by those forces too. And if the organization you're in is influenced by those sources, for example, products going out and changing, or finances being cut in certain areas of the business, then that directly impacts on you. So we have to be aware that these micro factors can actually impinge on you in your micro day-to-day actions. And I think just bringing awareness to that fact and being able to recognize how these factors are influencing you is the first step in trying to be resilient. If you can't recognize and you're not aware of the buffering that you're getting from certain stressors in your environment, then you cannot adapt to them. And that's what resilience really for me is about. It's about being able to work out what the stressors are and being able to manage them. But if you don't know what they are in the first place, they're difficult to manage. So awareness of them is key.
In terms of kind of the whole topic of resilience, maybe the definition of it, like Gabriel mentioned, we often think of bouncing back, and that's definitely a key part of it. But would there be something more that you could elaborate in terms of what is resilience? Is it something that we're born with, and we're, maybe I'm good at it or bad at it, and nothing I can do about it? Or is it a skill? Is there something that I can actually do? So maybe let's spend a few minutes talking about what really is resilience. Avril, would you like to start?
Thanks. On my end, I'd say it's definitely a skill. And as we know, skills are trainable. So yes, this is something that can be introduced, something that can be studied, can be learned, and can also be built upon. So whatever resilience skills are already in place, this is definitely something that can be expanded and grown. So, resilience is, as mentioned earlier, it is a bouncing back, right? It's how quickly can I pick myself up off the ground? How quickly can I, find a restorative, or how quickly can I restore myself, right? As after I've gone through a particularly intense or challenging period. And it really is that way of being adaptable to change. So it's like myself in a new situation. I find myself maybe even just in a new period of life with a new sense of self. And what can I do with that? How can I pick myself back up so that I can get back to the sense of being okay, I guess, because, you know, and I've experienced having to be resilient as well. I mean, we all have, we're all human, right? And as this happens, I've realized that it really feels like being knocked off center, like losing my foundation and having lost my base. And it's kind of like just coming back, literally picking myself back up, sitting myself down and saying, okay, girl, let's get this back, get yourself together, right? So it's coming back, finding a center, finding a focus, finding that sense of self from which I can move forward.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, one of the things, Neil, I was curious to kind of hear your thoughts as well, was around this, maybe the proactive nature of also of resilience and the idea of robustness and kind of tolerance to challenges, because that's another angle of, well, what is resilience?
Yeah, I think it's really important you know what you're being or optimizing your resilience for. One way to think about it is if you take a weightlifter lifting weights, so the pressure of the weight on your back is providing a stressor. But if you're ready to meet that stressor and you can move the weight, no problem. But the more you continue to do reps with that weight, the more fatigue that you'll be incurring. And I see resilience really as sort of that analogy. It's the ability to deal with these stressors that are coming towards us, and to do that over a prolonged period of time. Now, throughout the year, you'll have the number of stressors will vary, they will go up and down. The intensity of those stressors, so the difficulty in dealing with the challenges that you're faced, will go up and down also. And the frequency at which they arrive and the duration in which they stay will also change. So being able to map out in front of you and be able to think and have this nested thinking into the future about these stressors that are coming down the line and being able to manage how they land with you is really, really key. One of the biggest stressors is just managing fatigue. So the daily fatigue of the daily grind, 5 days a week, four weeks a month, 12 months of the year, year on year. Being able to manage that fatigue is key. So being resilient can be seen as just stopping these stressors. So the detachment from work is a key strategy in becoming resilient. So yeah.
Thanks, Neil. One of the things also around the idea of bouncing back is that sometimes things happen and we don't actually, in a sense, bounce back to where things were. Maybe some things are permanently changed. Maybe some things have happened that permanently change something around us, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't, as individuals, find a new normal, a new way of living, coping, surviving, thriving with the issues that have perhaps changed. So it's definitely about learning, it's about growth, it's about adapting into new circumstances and being able to thrive in those. We'll start to move towards looking at solutions or looking at strategies. What are we kind of finding helpful? But there's a great question there. We've all approached this so far from quite an individual perspective. There's a question there around organizations versus individuals. And it's a very interesting one. So how much is the organizational culture responsible and how much are the individuals responsible? And are we pushing kind of responsibility just to the individuals, or can we influence it with the organizational structure? Something that I can quickly comment on that is that I'm definitely seeing that in some organizations or some maybe even regions of an organization. Sometimes we work with a global organization. You get the privilege of talking with individuals from different parts of the world from the same organization. And in some places, you're hearing this constant kind of of chaos or constant kind of like there's just wildfires going here and there and people are rushing. And that's definitely a setting that makes it very challenging for the individuals also to be resilient, because there's a constant kind of, we're always a bit behind, or there's everything is last minute. And those are things that I'm definitely seeing as organizational challenges to the individual's resilience. Whereas then you see some other locations or some of the teams, some of the managers were able to be much more proactive in terms of the way that they organize their own work and the way that they give out tasks to individuals. And that is definitely something that also fuels a lot of the kind of capacity to deal with those issues. But maybe Neil or Avril both, I'd love to hear your thoughts around this organization versus individual aspect.
I'd love to jump in. Thanks. And, you know, this is actually something that I've really been focused on more recently, and something that I definitely want to start talking more about. So I love this question. And this is the concept of conscious leadership. Working within a conscious organization, and of course, championing conscious well-being as well. So why conscious? It is being aware of the fact of our humanness, the fact that we are human beings, of being authentic, of being vulnerable, of all of us having a shared experience. And in so doing, if we look at this from a top-down perspective, right? If the leadership starts out with conscious leadership and is focused on holistic well-being and therefore holistic life performance, right? Then we communicate this to our people. So on one hand, we start walking our own talk. We start to inspire others simply by living the way that we do and letting them see how we live life. And then we start to actually communicate it verbally, perhaps, or in email messages, the way we communicate with our teams, that this is something that we value. I value you being well so you can perform better at what you're doing. And I value this entire culture of being conscious, of being here, being present with each other, supporting each other, not only as office mates, but as a fellow human being as well. A lot of it really is also just in the talking about it, how we communicate it.
Yeah, and I think to that point, there tends to be a willingness of employees to try and be perfect at all the tasks coming their way. And I think in the modern world, that's really a misnomer. That's very, very difficult to do. And cultures sometimes do not differentiate between the really important tasks that are going to move and get traction and create high impact, and the tasks that need to be done but are less important. So I think the culture and the employee can filter, and they can rank the importance of particular tasks that need done. Also, the perfectionistic cultures can really undermine resilience. We think being perfect is a strength. And while it is a strength, and trying to reduce all the error and give the highest and best output possible, that is actually very, very difficult when you have a huge volume of tasks to get through. So sacrificing the desire to be perfect for the desire to be productive and being able to identify the tasks that are going to move and get maximum impact is really, really important. Also in cultures, there tends to be meetings for the sake of meeting's sake. There has been some really interesting studies done where they take meetings out on a Friday afternoon and another, say, 3 days a week after 12 noon. And actually those meetings aren't missed, and the output and the productivity goes up. So challenging norms in cultures is a good way forward for becoming resilient. You need to filter out the unimportant tasks and replace those, or just fully focus on those tasks that are going to move the organization forward to their long-term goals. And that's why goals are so important, because they really focus the mind on what the task relevant information is, and also what is irrelevant and needs discarded.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't
add,
go on,
sorry,
Avril.
go ahead. I was just going to say that to add on to Neil's points as well, that, you know, I find that having a discussion between leadership and management and everybody in the team on those priorities, you know, what are we prioritizing as a team, as a group, as a department, as a company, and then basing ways of moving forward or ways of working on that does seem to help. So that the aspect of collaboration, I guess that feeling of I have a part to play in this and I'm a valued member in this, that tends to help people feel better about it as well. And to Neil's point earlier about being perfectionistic, I know that in many cultures, people are afraid of saying no to work tasks. Because if I say no, then people might think that I'm lazy, might think that I don't know how to do my job. And yet, I've had several coachees, one in particular actually was promoted because of her ability to say no. Because by doing so, what she in fact exhibited was her ability to prioritize and to be able to be there for the things that were most important for the business. And her manager loved that about her.
So prioritizing definitely is coming up as a key issue in terms of the organizational aspect. The proactive nature of it is another one. When things are last minute and people are busy, you're on the edge and another task is added, and that can definitely feel like you're tipping over the edge. So thinking of it also from the perspective of what's my kind of capacity? How much buffer do I have? If I'm constantly on the edge, we sometimes talk about a pressure performance curve where, pressure is increasing and performance increases, but then there's a little tipping point. And if we're kind of thinking that we can constantly be in that tipping point, as Neil was also talking about, like constantly absolute perfection all the time, that's too risky. You've got such a risk of then, your performance declining significantly because you're tipping over the edge. Whereas if we've got a bit more buffer and we've got a bit more scope in us in terms of, well, I can push a bit further if needed. If an extra task comes my way, I can handle it because I have some buffer. Whereas if I'm constantly on that edge, anything little extra is going to tip me over, then we're struggling. Then we're in a situation where we're not resilient because we're living too close to that tipping point. There's an interesting question. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping through these questions a little bit, but the last question there, Neil, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it relates to resilience and burnout and this idea of how can some people sometimes handle also a lot of stress and maybe survive through that. And you've got a great example of a client who was in a very, very high stress situation, but felt like, hey, I'm doing fine, I'm doing good, I'm coping with this. Would love to hear if you could explain a bit more about that context.
Yeah, so this client, so I coached this client for 7-8 months, and I didn't see them for a few months and bumped into them on my bike actually when I was cycling to work. And I said to them, how's work going? And they said to me, work has been more stressful than ever. And I said, well, how are you? And they said, actually, I'm better than I've ever been. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, how are you better than you've ever been in a more stressful environment? You've never been in a more stressful environment. And they said it's simple. What I've decided to do is I've decided to block out from 9 till 11 every day for the high impact tasks. And I will do those high impact tasks and execute on them without meetings, without external noise. And they said that has made the difference in being able to thrive and see these challenges and all these stressors as challenges, and learn as a result. And they said the learning actually was the big thing. So the classic example is if you've got someone that's never done presentations before and they're standing in front of a big group, they're going to be very nervous. But if you practice that for a while and learn to be good at presenting, then the nerves are less. So in this particular individual, the anxiety that they were experiencing around their job was significantly decreased. And so they were managing anxiety much better. And this is something that really undermines an individual's ability to be resilient, is the amount of anxiety that they feel. And often those anxious thoughts can be irrational and not based on any fact. So we worked with this individual quite closely on being able to identify irrational beliefs that lead to anxiety and then being able to extinguish them. And then being able to work out, okay, what are the real stressors that you should be a little bit nervous about? But instead of viewing them as a threat or a challenge to yourself, view them as a challenge, view them as a learning opportunity. And so this was really a tipping point for this individual. They went from coping with stress to looking at stress as a learning opportunity and a challenge. And that was really the difference between thriving and sort of just keeping your head above water, which they really enjoyed. They saw it as a real challenge for themselves. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Neil. There's another interesting questions around dealing with stress triggers we might face in different circumstances. Avril, you talk a lot about kind of the emotional reactions as well, and how do we perhaps respond? How do we handle ourselves emotionally, perhaps in these kinds of things that might trigger us? Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more, maybe give some ideas of how to handle those types of circumstances?
Sure. I think an important thing to realize is the way that we think about something, right? The particular label that we give it, the particular thought process. Is this something that is good for me? Is this something that is bad for me? Is this something that's beneficial? Is this something that is painful? The way we think about something will actually create our experience of it. A good way to think about it is absolutely everything in the world is neutral. Nothing in itself has meaning until our minds give it meaning. Our minds are what dictate, oh, this is beneficial for me. Oh, I like this. Oh, I don't like that. So whether something's good or bad is in how we perceive it. So when it starts to come to stress, when we talk about our circle of better life, right? Many times when we talk about the mental energy aspect, and we mentioned that there are different kinds of stress. There is distress, which is difficult, distressing, and painful, hurtful to the mind and body. There's also eustress, which is, think of it as a challenge that gets you to grow and to move forward. So when things that we perceive as intense or difficult or challenging fall on our plate, how do you see that? What do you think about it? And one thing that I love looking at is, am I looking at this with a solutions-focused perspective? Am I looking at this as a puzzle? And I love puzzles. So is this a puzzle that I can solve? And how am I going to solve it? What is the next step? What is that one action step that I'm going to take next to move forward from this point and get me closer to my goal? So these are some things that we can adjust, right? I won't say just positivity, because there is such a thing as toxic positivity, right? But it is more of optimism, knowing and trusting that things will work out for the best one way or another, and at the same time feeling empowered that I can take an action step to get myself there.
Thank you very much. There's some great questions coming through. I'll pick up on the one where it says about supporting clients in reducing stimuli, less use of mobile phones, social media, etc., and all of that. One of the things that, again, tends to happen quite easily, that when life gets stressful, busy, hectic, we tend to drop things that are beneficial for us, and we tend to do things that maybe in a form of escapism, perhaps. We think that it gives us some kind of a relief from the challenges of today's world. And phone use, social media, binging on Netflix, all of that would fit into that category. So let's say I'm struggling. I'm really in a difficult place in my life and things are hectic. And in the evening, the best thing for me to do perhaps would be go for a gentle walk, have a nice meal, take a bath, just relax. But what do I end up doing? I end up picking my phone and spending an hour on Instagram or something, and then another couple of hours watching a few episodes of a Netflix series. And it's not that those things are bad, but they're not necessarily beneficial. They're not allowing us to slow down. They're not allowing our mind to be at ease and kind of build that capacity that we need for tomorrow. So definitely, yes, we do focus a lot on this with our clients in terms of trying to see that what are the habits that we often stop when life gets busy, and what are the habits that we really need to hold on to. Some researchers talk about the idea of keystone habits. So a habit that if I can hold on to this, I know that it'll kind of have these ripple-on effects into many other areas. I had a client who identified that for him, going to the gyms, a certain type of an exercise regime was that one thing. When he felt that things are getting busy, as long as he holds on to that, a lot of the other things that just kind of fall into place. So that's one of the things that I really recommend you to think through, that what's that one thing that I need to hold on to? But if I do that one thing, I tend to do a lot of other good things. Whereas if I drop that, I easily drop also a lot of other stuff. So that idea of keystone habits, or habits that are really, really fundamental, is something to think.
And yeah, just following on from you there, Matty, I think that's so key. When you're under a lot of pressure, these habits tend to go out the window. But these habits are the behaviors that keep us dialed in emotionally, and keep us in the right place emotionally, and keep our focus attuned to what's really important. And one of the key habits is your morning routine. The morning routine is absolutely key for sort of calibrating your arousal state and your emotional state. And everybody performs in a different sort of arousal. Some people perform much better when they're really highly aroused, really switched on. Others, who say maybe more research orientated, have lower arousal. And if you're not sure about your morning routine as a habit, try and just reflect on the really good days that you have, the days where you're just in a flow, and think back to what were the behaviors that you were doing in the morning, and what were the accompanying thoughts with those behaviors. So in sports psychology, we do that. We get a set of behaviors before the performance, and then we get a set of thinking actions that attach to the behaviors before you go perform. For the knowledge worker, your pre-performance routine is your morning routine. So reflect on those really great days, and conversely, if you have a really bad day, have a bit of reflection and go back to those habits in the morning. Did you have 3 cups of coffee before you left the house? Was it a difficult conversation with your partner? What were these things that might have just tripped you out of your optimal zone of functioning? Because yeah, we all have a lot of expertise to share, but if we're not in the right frame and we're not in the right state to apply that expertise to the challenges that are coming down the line, then we're in trouble. So with a lot of my clients, it's about unlocking their skills and reducing the anxiety, getting them into a good emotional place. And that tends to start with a really robust routine. So when the pressure ramps up, that routine stays the same, and it calibrates you for the day you've got ahead.
Absolutely. There's an interesting question there around training resilience. And one discussion that we had was around the idea of fire drills. My kids go to school, as most of your kids, if you have some, do as well. And in a school setting, they'll practice fire drills. And in a similar way, if you're in an airplane, the stewards over there, they will practice what do we do in an emergency. And with the practice, they're able to then handle themselves in that emergency situation in a way that is constructive, in a way that they don't panic. And I think this kind of panicking is what we're kind of, a lot of us are describing over here, that we get this tunnel vision and we don't necessarily do the things that we should do. Whereas if we think ahead and we, like, in a sense, do our fire drills of what's it going to look like when things get tough? What do I need to think through? So any further thoughts maybe on that idea of training or looking forward or thinking, is there something concrete that we can do to train resilience in a way of looking forward, preparing ourselves so that when the moment's there, we act in a way that's constructive?
To add to your thought of the, was it the fire practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned earlier, right, that I am a yoga therapist. And one thing about yogas, if you think about it, you are putting your body into uncomfortable positions, right? So there is a saying that we use in yoga therapy, which is off the mat and into the world. Or what you're practicing on the mat, you are actually practicing for the rest of your life, for these discomforts that come up in the rest of your life. And how do we deal with them? Personally, that has worked really well for me, because I find myself calmer. When I'm in a situation, it's like everything gets calm, I get focused, and then I start being able to see like, okay, how can I unpack this situation and find my way through it? And the second thing that has worked really well with my clients as well is simply planning and conscious choice. Because as we know that difficult situations are going to come up, because sometimes we are aware of these things in advance, we can start to plan for them. We can plan for that transition period so that we're not caught surprised and like, oh no, what do I do now? And at which point we would react completely from a place of emotional response, right? Whereas if we have that space, so what happens is in our brains, right? We have the amygdala hijack, which is when the amygdala, the part of our brain responsible for the emotional reactions, it gets triggered and then it releases all these neurotransmitters. And then we're so emotional in our response. But once we start focusing on things like learning awareness, mindfulness specifically, we create now a space. So stimulus, space, response. Now I can think it through. Now I can choose how I want to move forward from this situation and how exactly I want to bounce back from this.
Thanks,
Yeah, and
April.
I would agree. Yeah, just that the resilience is not about getting rid of challenge. It's actually about just being comfortable with challenge. And that is what the training is. In psychology, they call it stress inoculation training, where you progressively increase the stressors. Well, how does that happen in the workplace? By taking on more responsibility, by getting promoted. If you hadn't done that previous stage, then you wouldn't have the requisite skill set to be able to go to the next stage. And in these stressful situations, we get emotions that are sometimes uncomfortable. And in the psychology literature, they talk about diffusing these emotions. So not latching onto them and letting them toy with you, but being able to just see them for what they are, just a temporary sort of state that you become comfortable with, and then they disappear. So that is kind of the training of resilience as I see it. It's about this stress and stress inoculation and going into these stressful events, but seeing them as challenges and stimuli for growth. And then with all the emotions that come with them, being able to diffuse those emotions by standing back and just being open to them. If you let the emotion control you, you will demonstrate behaviors which aren't wanted, such as avoidance behavior, avoiding challenge. But if you can just speak the emotion and realize it's not part of you and it will disappear, then you can continue to engage and show an approach motivation and solve problems that are coming down the line rather than avoiding them. So yeah, just much in what Avril was saying.
Great perspective. That kind of brings to mind the job demand control support model in the sense that when demands are increasing, how much control do I have over handling those circumstances? Do I need more support? And sometimes if, for example, the challenge is very high, I might not be able to match that. Maybe I'm an individual who needs a little bit more support in that moment. So how to also spot that when you think of your team members and you think of the challenges that you're kind of giving them and they're being, that are they able to rise to the challenge? And with what type of support, perhaps? Do they need a bit more time? Do they need a bit more support? What type of things would that person need in order to be resilient in the midst of that challenge and be able to grow and learn through that? So those are definitely aspects to think through. There's a great question here also regarding points to emphasize for team leaders as they're giving a speech to a team before or after the announcement of results at a competition to ensure morale, resiliency. And one of the thoughts that comes to my mind on this is the idea of mindsets. That if I get for example, a bad result, do I think that therefore I am bad? I'm a failure. You know, I'm not going to be able to do that well, or am I able to evaluate myself in terms of, well, how much effort did I put in? What type of things did I do to prepare? Is this a result that I maybe deserve, perhaps to some extent? Are there things that I could do better? Is there something that I can learn, take away from this? So from that kind of fixed growth mindset perspective, that's definitely something that comes to my mind as a key piece also that connects with resilience, that how do we respond when the challenge is there? Maybe we don't kind of rise to the challenge. Maybe we don't complete something perfectly or even well. But what do I do with that? Do I feel like I don't want to take up any more challenges because what if I fail again? And, you know, then that just proves that I'm a failure. Or am I able to view it from a learning perspective? So any other thoughts, Neil or Abel, that you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, I've had a lot of success working with clients on this. So people have default mechanisms. So when they fail, there tends to be a sort of a bias towards blaming yourself and blaming things that you can't actually change, such as your ability or your natural intelligence. And that really undermines self-confidence and self-esteem because it's a global thing. So the next time I go, the likelihood is I'm going to fail because I just don't have the natural ability. But the minute you tell someone, actually, there is a different way, there's a different way of interpreting the failure. You can either interpret it to yourself or you can interpret it as out of your control and something that is external to you. Or if you want to take responsibility for the failure, do so, but do it towards something that you can control and you can change. So if it was that you'd had 3 hours sleep for the last 3 weeks and then you had a big presentation and it didn't go well, can you change your ability to sleep? The answer is yes. Is it your communication style? So this is a real eye opener for the clients I work with, and they can realize that they can actually change and control their future events, and that maintains their self-esteem, their self-confidence, and it also maintains high levels of motivation. So this is attribution theory, and yeah, how you attribute the event is very, very important to maintaining your self-esteem and thus maintaining high levels of motivation to going forward, even in the face of failure and setback.
Love that. Completely agree with that. And, you know, adding on to taking control, right? It's one thing that I often talk about with a lot of my clients as well is, what is your goal? Is your goal a passive goal or is it an active goal? Because for many of us, we tend to set passive goals. I want to lose certain amount of weight, or I want to get to whatever goal weight. I want to reach a certain position in my career. I want to have so and so many maybe social invitations per week. And these are all past goals, right? These are all the outcomes. And we actually cannot always control the outcome itself. If you think about it, what can we control? Our own behavior, our own thoughts, and the way that we approach things. So if instead of focusing on losing weight and getting to a certain goal weight, I focus instead on, I can get myself to the gym 3 times a week, or I can just be more active in my day, just move around a lot more, walking more often, taking the stairs or the steps, right? Instead of taking the elevator when I can. Focus on the action steps that we can take, thus being active in our goal setting. And that can make a huge difference because that in itself gives us a great sense of empowerment as well.
Thanks. There's a question around having an opposite world, so something different in a sense to maybe our work, job, something that helps us with balance. And there's an organization that we worked with that did some research. They're quite a high performing organization that drives their people pretty hard, and I can definitely testify to that from the communications that I've had with their staff. And they were worried for good reason that how are people coping who have families? Like how are their employees who are married, who have kids? How are they doing? Because they were worried that maybe they're kind of the worse off. And what they kind of found was somewhat maybe surprising for them, but they realized they're actually doing better in certain areas. And they realized that it's most likely due to the fact that these individuals had something that kind of forced them to close their laptop and say, this is it, I'm done. I've got to go home. I want to say goodnight to my kids. And that was another world that allowed them to force themselves to put a stop to their work. And this is something that we discuss with many of our clients who are high performing. And it's not like you have to force people to work. They love their work. They're passionate about their work. So sometimes we need protection from ourselves. It's not, sometimes, yes, there might be issues on the organizational level, but sometimes it's also that we can be so driven that unless we have something that's kind of that opposing world, and we realize that that's my performance enhancer, the fact that I'm able to kind of, I've got to have something else in my world, in my mind that I go to protect myself from just endlessly working today so that I can be resilient tomorrow as well, so that I can refuel myself for tomorrow. So realizing some of those issues is definitely an interesting aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult one because, yeah, detaching. So we call it psychological detachment. You can be away from work, but still in your head working, and with your family, but not present. I really like this saying, ask your 100-year-old self what advice they would give you. And that tends to help you just zoom out. This was actually by someone called Matthew Dix, who I was listening to the other day. And that really struck a chord with me because we always say, what is value-driven action? Do you want to work 24/7? Well, if you asked your 100-year-old self, would you want to do that? The answer would be no. So any one time, if you're stuck and you've got a difficult decision to make around detachment, ask yourself that, and then your values will come through. And if it is family, or if it is sport, or if it is something else, then you'll be pulled to that. And yeah, and that restores us. So we talk about Hintsa, these different modes. So mission mode, normal mode, but we've also got restoration mode and recovery mode. And these are key because we're an organic system. We need to recover. If we wear ourselves down, we're not like a machine that can go on forever. We need to, yeah, stop the stressors and immerse in something that's going to give us internal satisfaction and enjoyment and recharge us. And there is that option. Yeah.
And
Thanks,
to add
Neil.
to that, getting to that point of making that choice, something that has worked really well with a lot of my clients and with myself as well too, is being aware of the fact that in every decision, you are saying yes to something and you are saying no to at least one other thing, many times, many other things that you are saying no to. So you could say yes to work tonight because you're enjoying what you're doing, right? And it's beneficial for you and it's helpful. Sure, why not? But then at the same time, realize if I'm saying yes to work now, maybe I'm saying no to having a good dinner. Maybe I'm saying no to spending time with friends. So maybe, tonight, making that choice, that's fine. But maybe tomorrow you might want to make a different choice. It's simply that awareness of choose your yes, because you're saying yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Thanks. There's a good question or a comment also about kind of routines and all these must-dos. And first of all, it's an interesting question and comment and a very relevant one. I had a client and she caught herself quite a few times in our meeting saying, I said should again. These are positive things. Why did I say should? Why did I say that I can have to do that? I want to do these things. So that self-talk, first of all, is significant and important. But the other one is that a lot of these kind of good things can become stressful in and of themselves. Like I sometimes joke that you can become a victim of the Hintsa model. You try and absolutely perfect everything. Like I've got my perfect diet and I've got my perfect exercise plans, and the follow or pursuit of that perfection becomes a significant source of stress in and of itself. There's research around nutritional habits, for example, and if you're absolutely too rigid in everything, that stress from that rigidity can be more harmful for you than sometimes the benefits that you're getting from that so-called perfect diet. When they look at longevity research as well, it's not that I'm doing everything absolutely perfectly, because that drive to perfection, that kind of I've got a minute schedule for everything and I'm doing all these right things, might not be life-giving. So definitely you do have to find a balance and you have to think through, why am I doing this? Is it energy giving? Is it life giving? Is it something that I value and enjoy, or is it another must do? And trying to think through, how do I create a life that's not just following this list of rules or do's or don'ts? And that's another thing that I kind of, in terms of evening routines and habits as well. There's a lot of good sleep hygiene practices and they're super important. But if we create our evening to be another performance routine, that's not necessarily so nice, is it? Like we've got to also have some kind of fun and relaxation in our life and the ability to enjoy it, so that it doesn't come just kind of this constant pursuit of perfection. So that's another angle, maybe, in terms of all these positive habits and traits as well that we're looking for, how they can kind of turn against you, even in terms of challenging our resilience. There's also a question there around coping mechanisms for acute stress. And a question around, do you find somatic or cognitive strategies to be more effective in the moment? Any thoughts, April or Neil, around kind of coping with acute stress or failure in relation to that?
Yeah, in sport, we have a catastrophe model, and what it says is there's two types of stress. There's somatic stress, as you just said, and there's cognitive stress. And what they actually say is the somatic stress is what will undo you and make you catastrophize. And you see it in sport with athletes tanking. And so somatic stress has a powerful influence on our body, and then that has a powerful influence on our mind. So somatic exercises tend to be quite effective here. You can do abdominal breathing. You can do progressive muscular relaxation, where you tighten different facets of your body and hold that for 3 seconds, then release, and you get a relaxation response from that. You can do the body scan. You can simply just go for an external focus, so focusing on the areas of your body which are maybe painful or in contact with the ground if you're lying down. The whole point here is to sort of disconnect and short circuit the mind going crazy with thoughts. And if you just take your attention away from your mind for a minute and have that external focus, that is a really good acute strategy. Another one is just visualizing the warm air going in through your nose, and then the cold air coming in and the warm air going out. That can be very, very effective of just getting out of your head. Other strategies such as thought stopping, where you can just shout stop to your thoughts. You don't have to shout that out loud when there's lots of people around, but you could do that just with your mind. So there are lots of techniques and strategies that can be applied in the moment just to prevent catastrophization.
A lot of what I was going to say is exactly the same thing as what Neil just mentioned. I guess the thing is, what is most powerful in the moment? I would say somatic, in order to address the more cognitive stress that's going on. I'm assuming that this question was asked in reference to distress, right? And if you think about it, what is stress? It's usually a series of mental thoughts caused by fear. Stress and anxiety is that feeling of pressure because of fear. We are afraid of something, and then our minds continue down that rabbit hole to create the catastrophe that Neil just talked to us about, and create an entire mountain of a problem that may in fact be a very small thing initially. And ways to stop that, when Neil said that you can just shout stop, that made me think of something else that we do as well in neurolinguistic programming, which is, we call it SBNRR. Stop, breathe, notice, reflect, and then you respond, right? And if you think about it simply in terms of physics, in terms of physical matter, no two things can occupy the same space at the same time. It's the same thing in our thoughts. It's the same thing in our body. So when we stop this train of mental thoughts, we stop it by the body, it cuts that. And as I mentioned earlier with the amygdala hijack, it cuts that, it creates that space. So now, okay, I can be logical. I can have a thought space and then move forward from here. Sometimes it's jumping jacks.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to maybe ask if there's a few closing comments, Neil and April, in terms of, we've answered also a lot of the questions, that if there's something that you feel like, hey, this is, I wanted to still mention this to make sure that it doesn't kind of, that it's not said. One of the things that's been on my mind that we haven't yet touched upon is the significance of support of people around you in terms of resilience. Often when we isolate ourselves, things start to become bigger in our mind. Often we need other people to maybe see the stress that's building in us. We might deny it. We might need other people. We need to share our burdens and loads with other individuals. So just the significance of support, that might be in your work context, that might be in your home, friends, whatever that might be, different circumstances, but the significance of good support systems for resilience. So that would be at least one thing that comes from my side with regards to an issue that wasn't yet touched upon. But anything else that you'd like to add as kind of concluding statements, perhaps?
I would add on to that, Matti, that definitely, have people to talk to, and in so doing, know your tendencies. For myself, I'm an overthinker. I will really think everything, just all the way through, and have 26 types of backup plans. And in so doing, develop an accountability relationship with people. So someone that you can talk to, somebody whom you can trust to call you out on your tendencies, who can say, okay, you're overthinking, you're making this bigger than it has to be. And at the same time, you're holding yourself back when in fact you could be moving forward. I find that very helpful.
I would agree. Yeah. Distribute it. If you're holding far too much, let the environment hold some of that for you. Spread it and distribute it. And the best way to do that is through communication, as Avril and Matti have said. So that really helps, just knowing that you don't have to shoulder all that yourself, and that can be spread in socially or put on hold. Yeah, so resilience can be done through offloading. I think that's, so we build up these strategies to deal with it, but actually a good way is just to make ourselves more efficient by offloading the stressors or the things that inhibit us. So yeah, I'd add to that.
Yeah, offloading definitely, in terms of, we talked about prioritization, and so offloading also just things from our plate in general at times. Yeah. Just being able to see what really matters. And that's where obviously at Hintsa, we talk a lot about values, identity, who we are, what's important for us. And those things are fundamental also in our ability to be resilient if we have a good understanding of what's important. And Neil's thought of the 100-year-old self kind of connects well with that, of reflecting and thinking through, what do I actually value in life, and what ultimately is important, and can I offload? Are there some things that are maybe I've in my mind allowed to be too significant, when in the grand scheme of things, maybe they're not quite that important? Let me share a final slide to say thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our thoughts on resilience. Thank you for sharing questions that gave a lot of insight into the issues that you were perhaps reflecting on. You can scan the QR code if you're interested in some of the services that Hintsa provides. As we also close the session, it'll automatically take you into a little feedback link. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback in terms of the usefulness of this session. And based on that, we can improve and provide better services for you. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you for listening. Avril, Neil, anything else from your side?
I would have loved to have another hour. Thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much for your questions. Really great.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.